Money is a constant topic of conversation among nonprofit leaders. How much do we need? Where can we find it? Why isn't there more of it? In tough economic times, these types of questions become more frequent and pressing. And unfortunately, the answers are not readily available. That's because nonprofit leaders are much more sophisticated about creating programs than they are about funding their organizations, and philanthropists who struggle to understand the impact and limitations of their donations. These are consequences to this financial fuzziness. When nonprofits and funding sources are not well matched, money does not flow to the areas where it will do the greatest good. Too often, the result is that promising programs are cut, curtailed, and overlaunched. And when dollars become tight, a chaotic fundraising scramble is all the more likely to ensue. In the for-profit world, by contrast, there is a much higher degree of clarity on financial issues. This is particularly true when it comes to understanding how different businesses operate, which can be encapsulated in a set of principles known as business models. Although there is no definitive list of corporate business models, there is enough agreement about what they mean that investors and executives alike can engage in sophisticated conversations about any given company's strategy. When a person says that a company is a low-cost provider or a fast follower, the main outlines of how that company operates are pretty clear. Similarly, stating that a company is using the razor and the razor blade model describes a type of ongoing customer relationship that applies far beyond shaving products. The value of such shorthand is that it allows business leaders to articulate quickly and clearly how they will succeed in the marketplace, and allows investors to quiz executives more easily about how they intend to make money. This back and forth increases the odds that businesses will succeed, investors will make money, and everyone will learn from their experience. The non-for-profit world rarely engages in equally clear and succinct conversations about an organization's long-term funding strategy. That is because the different types of funding that fuels non-for-profits have never been clearly defined. More than a poverty of language, this represents and results in a poverty of understanding and clear thinking. Through our research, we have identified some not-for-profit models that are commonly used by the largest not-for-profits in the U.S. Our intent is not to prescribe a single approach for a given not-for-profit to pursue. Instead, we hope to help not-for-profit leaders articulate more clearly the models that they believe could support the growth of their organizations, and use that insight to examine the potential constraints associated with those models. Moving on, beneficiaries are not customers. One reason why the non-for-profit sector has not developed its own lexicon of funding models is that running a non-for-profit is generally more complicated than running a comparable size for-profit business. When a for-profit business finds a way to create value for a customer, it has generally found its source of revenue. The customer pays for value. With rare exceptions, that is not true in the non-for-profit sector. When a not-for-profit finds a way to create value for a beneficiary, for example, integrating a prisoner back into society or saving an endangered species, it has not identified its economic engine. That is a separate step. As a result of this distinction between beneficiary and funder, the critical aspects and accompanying vocabulary of non-for-profit funding models need to be understood separately from those for-profit world. It is also why we use the term funding model rather than business model to describe the framework. A business model incorporates choices about the cost structure and value proposition to the beneficiary. A funding model, however, focuses only on the funding, not on the programs and services offered to the beneficiary. All non-for-profit executives can use these funding models to improve their fundraising and management, but the usefulness of these models becomes particularly important as non-for-profits get bigger. There are many ways to raise as much as $1 million a year, some of which can be improvised during the process. Once organizations try to raise $25 million to $50 million or more each year, however, there are fewer possible paths. The number of potential decision makers who can authorize spending such large amounts of money decreases. You need to get them in mess, and the factors that motivate these decision makers to say yes are more established or cannot be as thoroughly influenced by one charismatic non-for-profit leader. Research of non-for-profits confirmed this. In a recent study, we identified 144 non-for-profit organizations created since 1970 that had grown to $50 million a year or more in size. We found that each of these organizations grew large by pursuing specific sources of funding, often concentrated on one particular source of funds that were a good match to support their particular type of framework. Each had also built up highly professional internal fundraising capabilities targeted at those sources. In other words, each of these large non-for-profits had a well-developed funding model. The larger the amount of funding needed, the more important it is to follow pre-existing funding markets where there are particular decision makers with established motivations. Large groups of individual donors, for example, are already joined by common concerns about various issues, such as cancer research, and major government funding pools, to cite another example, already have specific objectives, such as foster care. Although a non-for-profit that needs a few $1 million annually may convince a handful of foundations or wealthy individuals to support an issue that they had not previously prioritized, a non-for-profit trying to raise tens of millions of dollars per year can rarely do so. This is not to say that funding markets are static. They are not. The first Earth Day in 1970 coincided with a major expansion in giving to environmental causes. The Ethiopian famine of 1984 led to a drastic increase in support for international relief, and awareness of the U.S. educational crisis in the late 1980s laid the groundwork for charter school funding. Changes cannot be foreseen, however, and hence cannot be depended on as a source of funding. In addition, these changes were the product or culmination of complex national and international events, not the result of a single non-for-profit work. And here are some funding models. Devising a framework for non-for-profit funding presents challenges. To be useful, the models cannot be too general or too specific. For example, a community health clinic servicing patients covered by Medicaid and a non-for-profit doing development work supported by the U.S. Agency for International Development are both government funded. Yet the type of funding they get and the decision makers controlling the funding are very different. Lumping the two together in the same model would not be useful. At the same time, designing a separate model for non-for-profits that receive Title I SES funds, for example, is too narrow to be useful. In the end, we settle on three parameters to define our funding models: the source of funds, the types of decision makers, and the motivations of the decision makers. This allows us to identify distinct funding models at each level that is broadly relevant yet defines real choices. It is important to note that there are several funding models we thought we might find but did not. One possible model was non-for-profit supported by earned income ventures distinct and separate from their core mission-related activities. Another possible model was not-for-profits that operated on a strictly fee-for-service model in either a business-to-business or direct-to-consumer fashion, without important supplementary fundraising from members to prior beneficiaries or underlying government support. Although there are some non-for-profits supporting themselves with such funding approaches, they were not present among the large non-for-profits that were studied. It is our belief that these types of approaches do not lend themselves to large-scale sustained non-for-profit advantage over for-profit entities. What follows is some descriptions of some funding models here. Number 1. Heartfelt Connector. Some not-for-profits such as the Make-A-Wish Foundation grow largely by focusing on causes that resonate with the existing concerns of large numbers of people at all income levels, and by creating a structural way for these people to connect where none has previously existed. Not-for-profits that take this approach use a funding model we call the Heartfelt Connector. Some of the more popular causes are in the environmental, international, medical research areas. They are different from non-for-profits that tap individuals with particular religious beliefs, political leanings, or sporting interests who come together from organizations in the course of expressing their beliefs. Heartfelt connectors often try to build explicit connections between volunteers through special fundraising events. The Susan Conan Foundation is an example of a not-for-profit that uses the Heartfelt Connector model. Established in 1982, the Coleman Foundation works through a network of 125 affiliates to eradicate cancer as a life-threatening disease by funding research grants, by researching education, screening, and treatment projects in communities around the world, and by educating women about the importance of early detection. The Foundation's mission has a deep resonance with many women, even though its work may never benefit them directly. Between 1997 and 2007, the Coleman Foundation's annual fundraising grew from $47 million to $334 million. The average individual donation is small, about $33, but the Foundation's fundraising efforts have been driven by its ability to reach out to an ever-widening base of support. Its major fundraising vehicle is the Susan Komen Race for the Cure. The Foundation and its affiliates hold about 120 running races each year that draw more than 1 million participants. These events not only allow individuals to give money, they also engage volunteers to put together teams, solicit funds, and participate in the race day experience. Non-for-profit leaders considering the Heartfelt Connector funding model should ask themselves the following questions. Have a large cross-section of people already shown that they will fund causes in this domain? Can we communicate what is compelling about our non-for-profit in a simple and concise way? Does a natural avenue exist to attract and involve large numbers of volunteers? Do we have or can we develop the in-house capabilities to attempt broad outreach in even one geographic area? Another one, Beneficiary Builder. Some not-for-profits such as the Cleveland Clinic are reimbursed for services that they provide to specific individuals but rely on people who have benefited in the past from these services for additional donations. We call the funding model that these organizations use the Beneficiary Builder. Two of the best examples of Beneficiary Builders are hospitals and universities. Generally, the vast majority of these non-for-profits funding comes from fees that beneficiaries pay for the services the non-for-profits provide. But the total cost of delivering the benefit is not covered by the fees. As a result, the non-for-profit tries to build long-term relationships with people who have benefited from the service to provide supplemental support, hence the name Beneficiary Builder. Although these donations are often small relative to fees, average approximately 5% at hospitals and 30% at private universities, these funds are critical sources of income for major projects such as building, research, and endowment funds. Donors are often motivated to give money because they believe that the benefit they receive changed their life. Organizations using a Beneficiary Builder model tend to obtain the majority of their charitable support for major gifts. Princeton University is an example of a non-for-profit that uses the Beneficiary Builder model. The university has become very adept at tapping alumni for donations, boasting the highest alumni giving rate among national universities, 59.2%. In 2008, more than 33,000 undergrad alumni donated $43 million to their university. As a result of the school's fundraising prowess, more than 50% of Princeton's operating budget is paid for by donations and earnings from its endowment. Non-for-profit leaders considering the beneficiary funding model should ask themselves the following questions. Does our mission create an individual benefit that is also perceived as an important social good? Do individuals develop a deep loyalty to the organization in the course of receiving their individual benefit? Do we have the infrastructure to reach out to beneficiaries in a scalable fashion? Another one, Member Motivator. There are some non-for-profits such as Saddleback Church that rely on individual donations in using a funding model we call Member Motivator. These individuals who are members of the non-for-profit donate money because the issue is integral to their everyday life and is something from which they draw a collective benefit. Non-for-profits using the Member Motivator funding model do not create the rationale for group activity, but instead connect with members and donors by offering or supporting the activities that they already seek. These organizations are often involved in religion, the environment, arts, culture, and humanities. The National Wild Turkey Federation, which protects and expands wild turkey habitats and promotes wild turkey hunting, is an example of Member Motivator. It attracts turkey hunters who collectively benefit from NWTF, National Wild Turkey Foundation's work, and therefore become loyal members and fundraisers. Local NWTF members hosted more than 2,000 fundraising banquets each year, raising about 80% of the organization's annual revenue. These banquets provide multiple donation opportunities, entry tickets which cost about $50 each, include an annual membership, merchandise purchase averaging more than $100 per attendee, raffle tickets generating more than $16,000 per banquet. NWTF's national headquarters supply raffle prizes and merchandise to Southeast Banquet, and each banquet clears on average $10,000 after expenses. A significant portion of money raised is dedicated to land and turkey conservation, the community from which it was donated. Non-for-profit leaders considering the member-motivated funding model should ask themselves the following questions. Will our members feel the actions of the organization are directly benefiting them, even if the benefit is shared collectively? Do we have the ability to involve and manage our members in fundraising activities? Can we commit to staying in tune with and faithful to our core membership, even if it means turning down funding opportunities and not pursuing activities that fail to resonate with our members?